You want to take the lead on this one, or shall I introduce? How do you want to do it? All right. So, hello to anyone that's listening out. I guess it's the third episode of Abstract Amoeba. Today, we're going to be going into representation in the arts, specifically, I guess, the ethnic kind, if you will. There's this trend recently with gender bending, or more specifically, race bending characters. Is there a downside to that? Is there an upside to that? Also, are we Black people specifically being represented in a positive, realistic way, or is this some kind of weird, fairy tale, depiction, kind of thing that is negative and positive? So these are things that we're kind of trying to break down in this episode. Tunde, man, have you got anything you want to, suggest that we go into at the moment?
Yeah, so I think basically to kick this off, let's just ask ourselves firstly, what does ideal representation look like?
Here's the thing. I remember CHIMAMANDA NGOZI ADICHIE, who wrote the book Purple Hibiscus. He wrote Half of a Yellow Sun. She wrote AMERICANAH. I believe she's a Nigerian author, if I'm not mistaken. So kind of coming from that sort of tradition that was sort of set by Chinua Achebe, with Things Fall Apart, Arrow of God, all that kind of stuff. And with Chimamanda, she basically had a talk which I thought was quite a powerful one, where she was saying the power of the single story, I believe. And I think she was basically saying that the single story is not a great thing. It's not a good thing, because the single story can kind of cement things like stereotypes. The single story can paint a people or a group of people in a particular way. Obviously, with the understanding that like a novel is basically a construct. And what I mean by construct is that it's well, to use the sort of Baudrillard term, is simulacra or simulacrum, where basically all that is it's a construct. So we know that a story is made up of chapters. It's then broken down into paragraphs. It's then broken down into sentences, obviously words, and all of that together, put in a specific way, creates the constructs of a story. Even the very characterization, okay, is a work of creation, is a creative process. You think up this character, okay, that doesn't necessarily exist, but it exists within the construct of the novel. Now, because of that, because novels in a sense are kind of simulacrum, or they're constructs in that sense, what that means is that they are kind of like repositories for ideas, for and ways of seeing people, ways of seeing things. Now, with that being said, if there's only a single story about a group of people, that single story can become the overwhelming and the sort of overarching narrative that becomes something that people genuinely believe. So to take, for example, Chinua Achebe made Things Fall Apart, where he was sort of describing this character called Okonkwo, and basically Okonkwo is kind of like the head of a tribe. Now, gone are the days now where you look at Africa and you look at, I don't know, Nigeria or Ghana, or you look at, I don't know, Ivory Coast or whatever, and you see simply tribes, okay, in the sense that they have the tribal gear, in the sense that they do the tribal dances. That there may be elements of that in those pockets of society, or on certain occasions, but for the most part, Africa, there are bustling cities there. People are, have careers that are not dissimilar from what's happening in North America or happening in the UK. So I think sometimes if we were to look at the world through the sort of lens of Achebe, we would actually be looking at Africa with a sort of a lens which was not true to what is not true to how Africa is seen or should be seen today. And so what she was basically saying about the single story is that ultimately we want to make more stories. We want to make more. So if there exists an Achebe where he's talking about African tribes and he's talking about a protagonist called a Okonkwo, then we can equally have another story that outlines Africa in the modern world. Okay. Equally, we could have another story which takes, I don't know, second generation Africans or people from the African diaspora in the UK and tell that story. Okay. And by telling all of these stories, by having this sort of multiplicity of stories, remember, which are kind of encapsulated within these constructs, encapsulated within these stories, which are, like I said, are simulacrum. What that does is that prevents stereotype from existing, okay, and it helps us to be broader in our mindset, and essentially when it comes to representation, then it's perhaps a little bit more realistic, I would say, just to kind of kick it off.
Yeah, I hear that. No, and to jump off that, you are right. When there is one story, these stereotypes do prevail. Case in point, especially now, there's lots of people within the Black community that are kind of over the whole struggle movie, film where it's depicting slavery and stuff like that. Because to be fair, it kind of gives this, not to say that everyone, I think most people know that this is just representing a particular part in history and stuff like this. But when this is constantly being made all the time, you can understand how this could start warping or changing the perception of how certain groups are seen, if that makes any sense. Same thing with like the term that's coined, the Black movie, where it would be about I don't know, sometimes it's about like a player, yes, this then now the Black guy is starting to see as a sex object, if you know what I'm trying to say, or the Black movie that is kind of in the hood, if you will. And now the thugs, this kind of thing. And if these certain types of stories persist, people do start to think of, that's what they associate Black people with. And I think in the last few years, I've seen where, I don't know if anyone's heard of Lovecraft Country by any chance. So it was a book. No, it was HBO. HBO. It was a book, and then it was turned into a TV series. And it's amazing because it deals with magic. It's like, okay, the best way to describe it is I think it's like 10 episodes. Every episode has a different genre feel, if that makes any sense. So one episode feels very sci-fi, like kind of pulp sci-fi. One deals with magic. One deals, just as the name suggests, Lovecraft Country. It deals with those weird monsters and mythological, giant entities of a Lovecraftian kind of story. And it's a predominantly Black cast. Personally, when I saw it, I'm happy because now we're seeing different types of stories that involve Black people. It's not the stereotypical stuff. And, as much as, for anyone out there that's listening, please don't kill me. As entertaining as Black Panther was, it wasn't my favorite Marvel movie. But I do respect the fact that it was a predominantly Black cast, and it did make such a impact in terms of financially, as well as it started up a dialogue. I guess these Black movies can make some money. But this is the thing is that also brings up some fear that there's going to be all these projects with a Black cast that are greenlit simply because they're making money, if that makes any sense.
But remember though, Hamza, that isn't unusual. And what I mean by that is, if we're talking strictly business and we're talking trends.
No, this is true. Yeah. This is true.
If we think about the book business, the business of novels, what tends to happen is a book comes out. If it does really well, like let's say for some reason that author has sort of harnessed something from the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, and for some reason people are gravitating towards this story. They're really devouring this story. They are talking about it. There are various constellations of communities that speak on this story. The popularity of that story becomes obvious. Now, what happens is publishing houses would look to kind of follow the trend. So it's not that there would be randomly like new writers out of nowhere writing about the same thing, possibly. But remember, writing a book takes time. It's not something that you can just literally do in a day unless you're Stephen King. You can't do that. So ultimately, what that means is they'll have, authors that for some reason haven't done as well, but they've produced work of that kind of ilk.
Yeah.
And then they'll just essentially put it to the fore. That's why when Twilight came out, then all these other sort of jabronis,
vampire,
all these jabronis, those kind of anyway, other versions of the exact same kind of thing
came
start coming out in droves. And it's the same thing with Harry Potter. Obviously, magic starts coming out. All these things to do with magic. We know that what was it? Game of Thrones came out. Then there's these other spin-offs, Witcher, and all these other things that kind of begin to sort of echo.
Actually, Hamza's going to make a correction. There we go.
Witcher is actually older, but
but the point is, Game of Thrones made adult, hold on. So is it fantasy?
Older? Is it older in terms? Sorry, Tunde. Is it older in terms of the actual book was made before Game of Thrones, or is it older in terms of the actual film series was made before the Game of Thrones series?
To be fair, this is something I have to go back on. Which I think Game of Thrones came out, was it in the early 90s?
The book.
I could actually get a research on this, man.
Yeah, exactly. Do some research.
Hey, man,
1992, sorry. 1992.
And I think
The Witcher predates Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So fair enough. So Witcher came before. But the point is, Witcher comes out, then Game of Thrones comes out. Now here's the thing.
Yeah, I get it.
Now, and then obviously, as you can imagine, there's other things, other spin-offs that may occur just because that is what is in at the moment. So when you have that fear that, okay, there may be, after the smash hit that Black Panther was, you may have other sort of iterations or versions of a kind of Black Panther-esque world or that people begin to kind of consume. Hey man, it's kind of, it makes sense from a business.
No, I do get that, but this, sorry to cut you short tonight, but this is the side of me that's kind of like, it's one thing to milk a genre, right? But to milk a culture or a people, that is where it gets a little.
But here's the thing,
potentially tricky.
Sorry, anyway, I'm gonna say one thing and then obviously let Tunde jump in. Because here's the thing. What do you mean though? Because are you then saying that the world of Black Panther was based in reality?
No. Definitely not.
So what do you mean by culture?
It did take a lot of real world influence, if you will. Granted, for those that people, and this is true, apparently people are actually booking or trying to find tickets to Wakanda. This is actually real. So all those listening, Wakanda is not a real place. It doesn't exist.
The estate agent, the travel agent that's selling those tickets is a genius.
Exactly, he's a con man.
Take him in a plane, send him around, and then
yeah, there it's down there, innit? But the thing is, granted, this is true. It is a fictionalized thing, but yes, it does take a lot of real world elements. Even the accents and stuff like this. This is something that are kind of derivatives of real world things. So my fear is, granted, as I said, this is not a real place. My fear is they might start tapping into some real stuff and kind of not depicting it in a respectful way. That's my fear. At the end of the day, these are I
hear that, but remember, Hamza, how do you think world building happens?
No,
when you're creating a novel or you're creating a film, let's take for example the Lord of the Rings. J.R.R. Tolkien. This guy essentially mined Nordic Scandinavian culture.
Yeah, this is true.
And he kind of transmogrified it brought it through a process of transformation to make, you know, the elves of whatever, some Silmarillion or whatever, or you know, the dwarves of Mordor, whatever you want to call it, or Moria. Sorry. So the point I'm trying to make,
dwarves of Mordor, yeah,
exactly, the dwarves of Moria, or whatever it is. But the point I'm trying to make is that that's how you make art. That's how you make something convincing.
Yeah,
you have to take something from the real world and slightly adapt it. That's how it works. If you take something completely alien, then we won't understand it. We won't be able to connect to that story or that narrative that you're saying.
Yeah, I hear that. I do hear that. Yeah, Tune, man. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I don't. Of course, representation is incredibly important, but then it also comes with it a level of respect. So ultimately, I guess what Hamza's saying, or maybe if I'm interpreting his point, which is that the quality or the respect that certain cultures are handled with is quite important. Otherwise, we might end up in that sort of blaxploitation type of period.
Yeah, pretty much.
But you know, the commercials are the commercials. There have been loads of films that have had black casts and haven't done so well, you know, or haven't received the sort of rave reviews that maybe they expected. So coming to mind is Red Tails, you know, the film is that 2012 about like the Tuskegee Airmen, which I thought was a great film, but didn't really seem to get the traction that people wanted. Black Panther, for some reason, managed to tap into some thing within a lot of people. And I actually think it's not just the fact that it's a predominantly black cast, but I actually think it's the fact that it is fantastical, which is what is inspiring to people, because it maybe separates, you know, because in a lot of those cases, even with something like the Tuskegee Airmen, the tale of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Could it also be because it was empowering as well?
Well, yeah, it's empowering, and it's not linked to the very real world consequences of the transatlantic slave trade and, you know, real world consequences of racism and all of those types of things. It's a very empowering story. It doesn't have anything. That's got nothing to do with this tale. Well, I say nothing. It does have something to do with it, but nothing to do with the hero.
I think,
and I was going to say they even use the black experience as almost as a legitimate way to explain the reasoning for the negativity and the antagonist of the film in Killmonger. So even Killmonger is sort of redeemed in the sense that his struggle is actually one that all of us can identify with, and the hero is someone who seemed to sort of rise above that and become, you know, the Black Panther, become heroic. I think that's got a lot to do with the particular success of that. And in terms of representation, you know, I don't think it's very easy for a studio to basically just say, okay, fine, Black Panther did well, so let's just stick a whole bunch of black people on camera and we should get the same result. You know, I think the ingredients to make that are not so simple.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose they okay, from a sort of business perspective, there are ways around that, i.e. the fact that they're making Black Panther 2 and Ryan Coogler is at the helm again. So if you get the individuals that have made authentic art before, involved somehow, whether it be in the production, whether it be, you know, as a producer, as a director, financier, whatever it is, then hopefully that will kind of retain that sense of authenticity. But I think one of the things that maybe made, you know, black people, and I say that bearing in mind that we're not a monolith. Like each and every one of us, we have our own ideas, our different thoughts, belief systems, etc. But one of the reasons why I think a lot of people resonated, especially a lot of black people resonated with that film, is because it was popular. And what I mean by that is, one, first and foremost, the outlet was Marvel. Disney obviously consuming Marvel. And then obviously as a result, you had Disney money, man. You had the power of the mouse behind essentially the production value. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I would say that comic book films are today's, or the contemporary, or today's sort of Western, in the sense that when Westerns were really popular, Westerns were everywhere. They proliferated the screens, especially in cinema. So I would say it's the kind of Western of today. And to be able to see, I suppose, someone with black skin in the most popular art form, with the sort of the same amount of care and sort of excellence, that Disney tend to put into their products, of course, that is inspiring. Of course, it's going to make you feel that, it's going to make you feel a little bit quite special that, actually, finally, we've got a story that we can kind of call our own in a way.
What were you going to say, Tony?
No, I was going to say, but it didn't quite work with the Frog Princess, though, did it?
This is true.
The thing about the Frog Princess, though...
But she was also 2D.
Yeah, but again...
And that's kind of an aging art form, unfortunately.
Of course, but it's still got a lot of the same mechanics. But it didn't quite work. And maybe you could argue maybe the audience wasn't ready, especially in that medium. Or maybe it is, like Mike's saying, it's because of the comic book package. Let's not also forget there was Blade, back in 1998 or whatever it was, which was obviously a very successful film and a good film. But Blade didn't have a predominantly black cast and a black director behind it.
Here's the thing, though. I want to kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works, because I feel like as much as the Black Panther was good, and I hear your sort of your fear, Hamza, about will this then give other studios license to kind of exploit the black experience for the dollar? I mean, for the pound, for the sterling. But I feel like, I don't know if that's that's one issue. But I think another issue for me is like how we actually perceived, Black Panther. Like, I genuinely felt that it was great. It was a great film, but it was by no means the best. It wasn't the greatest Marvel film I've seen. I'm not saying that it needed to be the best Marvel film, but I think the way in which people were speaking about it was almost like they were or they were having some sort of religious experience, going to watch a film in the dark for however long, 90 minutes and upwards. So the way I see it is, I don't know, sometimes I feel that we are kind of putting too much on cultural artifacts, putting too much kind of like hopes and dreams and,
could it have just been that black people are starved, if you will, of content like this, to this magnitude? Like, I mean, Disney money is no joke, and the fact that it was in a kind of a Marvel package as well. Could it be that there just hasn't been anything on that level?
Well, yeah. Like, again,
why?
Yeah.
Why did it resonate so much?
Cultural shifts. We spoke previously, we mentioned the Overton window, about what's accepted and whatnot. Like, black people, everybody exists within the same culture. So we all consume the same materials, and everybody, in a sense, I think, believes that they are equal to each other. I think over recent times, there's been a growing demand to see more of that, let's say more of that representation on screen for various reasons. Maybe that demand wasn't there. And maybe people weren't aware of that demand. So people respond to things, that they, like you said, when it's packaged in that particular type of way, they respond to it positively.
But Tunde, I think Chris Rock said it kind of best in that that monologue he did at the Oscars. Look, at certain times, whether we're talking mid-60s or a little before then, look, or even 1948 when blacks kind of first came to the UK, on obviously the Windrush and obviously later the Orbiter, etc. Look, we had bigger fish to fry. It wasn't a big deal for us not to be represented in film. We were just trying to integrate into society, just to be kind of taken as equals. So in a sense, it's kind of like, I almost feel like this is a kind of first world problem.
Yeah, to some degree.
The problem of representation. Because we're kind of not complaining, but we are demanding to be represented on film. Okay. And in a sense, for me, that's the problem of a society that is quite well off. That's not the problem of a society that's struggling.
I agree. I think it does represent the change in focus of where the struggle ultimately is. But I don't think we could underplay the importance of it, because in our modern day and age, film essentially dictates our perspective. Cinema gives us our modern mythologies. The comic book film, just like the Western, has become our modern form of mythologizing. The Western is essentially the myth of how America was created, omitting some of the more brutal elements of their history. The comic book film is the myth of the current age. So I can see the importance of being represented in there, to be seen as equals in that sort of telling of our modern era. But it definitely wouldn't have been an issue 30 years ago, 40 years ago, because there was a genuine struggle for rights, for equality. Arguably, yeah. So this is a first world problem, but it is an important one, because we're talking about how and when I say culture, it's such a reductive statement, because there are so many Black cultures. It's such a reductive thing to look at something like whether it, and obviously we're sort of focusing on Black Panther, but whatever product is produced, to look at that as a beacon for a particular culture. I think if anything, it should just be taken as a catalyst for other people to tell stories deriving or based from that cultural perspective, and be confident that it can be financially successful and it can tell a more positive and heroic story rather than a negative retrospective story, like maybe some of the slavery related tales might be.
Just to go off that a little bit, and representation in whole, how important is it? The reason why I say that, going back to the trend I said with this whole race bending thing, specifically in comics, right? I don't know if you guys are aware of what the Flash, Wally West, who for the longest time was depicted as a redheaded.
Wally West?
Yeah, he was in the Justice League cartoon. It
the
wasn't
Flash
Alan.
Is Barry.
It wasn't Barry Allen. He was the second Flash.
I can't keep up.
No, but this is old school. This is old stuff. This is old stuff, though. To be fair,
Wally West.
Wally West, redhead. Check him out. Do the research.
Hey, has he got any sort of like relation to Where's Wally?
Hey man, talk to DC, man. This isn't me.
Wally West.
For decades, he was depicted as a redhead white guy, and recently he was race bent into a black dude. And then obviously, the most probably, I think, in my opinion, the most successful race bending, if you will, Miles Morales. And then
you had a skill that the Avatar can learn. See, like fire bending, water bending.
Yeah, race bending, the 5 nations. But yeah, so there's this kind of trend. The point I'm trying to make is, for me growing up, right, I was a massive Spider-Man fan, right? Peter Parker's race was never.
Yeah, and that's I can attest to that, because this guy used to draw stuff on the tables in art.
Exactly. So I'm not joking, man.
Defiling government property with Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. But yeah, his race. I'm just being honest. His race was never. I never thought I could relate to him or anything like that. To me, he was always relatable because he was a young guy who had real issues, whether it was dating or spots or whatever the case may be, things that I think most teenagers could relate to. And it was only as I got older and most people kind of started to go, oh, but, I see myself in this character because he's black or he's, Spanish or whatever the case may be. And I start to think, how important is it that someone is the same color as me? And there has been cases, don't get me wrong, I'm completely honest, there has been cases where a character has been a particular race, like black, or from a particular part of the world, and I can relate to him a little bit more, if that makes any sense. Maybe it's just because of the things he says or certain things that he brings up or the foods that he talks about, and I'm like, I do get that. But then there's cases where I don't think it's that important. Case in point, as I just said with Peter Parker, his color was not a big deal to me. And then there was Enter the Spider-Verse with Miles Morales. And yes, again, there's certain things I did understand because he was
best Spider-Man, hands down.
Yeah,
best
Spider-Man.
Yeah,
sure. The things with his uncle and stuff like this, I could, because I had an uncle like that. But is that because? But surely there's white people, there's Indian people that have had uncles like that too. Is not just because he's a black guy, if that makes any sense. So how important is representation?
But here's the thing. I think it's funny because it's funny that you say that, because sometimes you can see a character who has the same shade of skin, that mahogany brown. And you're looking at that character and you think, okay, that character looks like me. That character may even eat the same foods that I eat. I don't know, maybe he's hanging out at the patty shop. You know what I mean? Exactly. Eat, ackee and saltfish. Obviously if you're Jamaican. But at the same time, does that mean you relate to him just because? For me, that's a superficial relation.
Yeah.
You relate, and you'll be relating to that person. Sorry. Very superficially. The way I see it is, I think we relate to characters based on their values. It's not based upon those kind of external elements. It's based on ultimately their motivations, what drives them, what they consider to be the highest ideal within their lives. Because ultimately, the reason I can identify with Miles Morales is not just because he's a black boy. The reason I can identify with Miles Morales is because he's a bit insecure. Yeah? That he's actually he's a normal guy. He's a normal guy. He goes to school. He wants to have his own swagger. He wants to have his kind of own cool. But at the same time, there are elements in his life where he's insecure, where he does not feel empowered. And so when you do see him being empowered, okay, whether it be by the other Spider-Men from different dimensions, okay,
and a Spider-Girl,
and a Spider-Girl, and a Spider-Pig,
two Spider-Girls, and
a Spider-Pig. Let's not forget the pig as well, man. Because of that, we see him grow, we see him become empowered, and we see him actually become the Spider-Man that we would want him to be.
Yeah. But
Spider-Man that was very distinctly Miles Morales. It wasn't the Spider-Man that's Peter Parker. He could never be the Peter Parker Spider-Man. And I think ultimately that's what I think people should really be looking for in a character, which then makes me think, to answer to Hamza's question, does the characters that we look up to have to be the same shade as us?
So I don't think they do, but I think one of the things that we can argue in favor of representation is that those traits you've identified with Miles Morales, that he does have that insecurity, he does have that vulnerability. He's someone who's looking for role models, someone who has issues in his family life. These are universal things, but in a way, with showing that it's a universal thing, but it can happen to a black person or a Latino person or whatever, right? I think does go some way in normalizing that, because you have to bear in mind, obviously, we're all black, so we understand that we have the same feelings as prick me and I not bleed and all that type of stuff, right? But it normalizes that, maybe the goal trying to move people away from those stereotypes that if you're black and you're male, you have to be strong, you have to be this, you can't feel pain. all of these types of things. It's maybe normalizing a different view of the emotional journey that people of different ethnicities can go through, which is ultimately, as we know, it's the same. Every human will ultimately experience the same, or not the same emotional journey, but are capable of experiencing the same emotions. But showing it on screen, I think, does have some impact. It does have some impact there.
Yeah, and I think, and I was just going to say, and go on, sorry.
Go for it. Yeah, no, but similar to Hamza, growing up, you watch these characters in comics and whatever else. It doesn't play into your mind their race, and that could just be something that's about us. Maybe we are, colorblind to some extent, right? But psychologically speaking, there is an importance there with social learning for a lot of people, in the sense that if you see something, you're more likely to accept it, and the more you see it, the more likely you are to accept it.
I agree.
Well, I think firstly, I would say that, it's said that when a story is very specific, that's when you tap into its universality. Yeah. The more specific a story, the more universal it will become, because we're fundamentally dealing with human motivations. Okay, our likes, our dislikes, our drives, our MOs, etc. Okay, so because of that, if you drill down deep enough into your own personal story and your own experience and your own representation, actually everybody should identify with it, regardless of the color of your skin. There's something that Tine mentioned, though, that I think is a bit of a hot topic and a bit of a point of contention, though, because he mentioned the whole idea of color blindness. Now, here's the thing. I would argue that, yes, I, to some degree, consider myself to be colorblind. However, me saying that, I know there'll be some people saying, what on earth are you talking about?
Yeah.
How on earth can you be colorblind in a world where some may argue you have the idea of, or the concept of, white supremacy, or the fact that all throughout our childhood, most Disney films have had white protagonists. The fact of the matter is, we've only really seen black characters. Firstly, when we have seen black characters, especially in when animation was kind of in its infancy, we kind of seen them in a very kind of negative, stereotypical way.
Sidekicks,
the maid in Tom and Jerry,
the maid,
the crows, Dumbo.
Exactly.
Which I actually found out recently were voiced by white guys. I didn't know that. Yeah. The crows and Dumbo, actually voiced by white guys.
Yep.
But yeah.
So which is, the character, like, for example, that character Bosco, I think it's Mary Melody's character, Bosco, who was actually meant to be a little black boy, which is essentially someone in blackface. I mean, yeah, these are some of the things that have been how black people have been sort of depicted within animation, and so on in the past. And then the only time we've really seen real representation is from like films like Moana, Coco, obviously in The Incredibles with Mr. Incredible's best friend, Frozone. And so on. And some people may even say even Frozone's wife, to some degree, still kind of ticks the box of stereotype. Yeah. But the point is, the way I see it, perhaps people will then say, look, but how can you say, you're colorblind when this is a reality? We have not seen even, a huge company like Disney actually look at black people or represent black people properly or in a realistic way in any of their films until very, very recently. And so the question is, how can you be colorblind? But I don't know. I feel like colorblindness isn't a literal term. I don't think it means that I don't see color, like in that sense. It's in a way it's used figuratively to say that even if I recognize the existence of racism and prejudice, I choose, to give people the benefit of the doubt. And because people are manning systems don't just happen autonomously. Systems happen when there is a group or a collective of people within it. So because I understand that people are man systems, I choose to believe that, well, today anyway, there aren't those systemic structures that we could call racist.
No, I actually completely agree. But this is the thing. Unfortunately, it's come to the point now where if a person is, race bent, or they want to have an interracial couple in a advert, for example. Unfortunately, now sometimes it's seen as a political statement, and it's a little bit sad. To a certain extent, I hear what you're saying about the whole color blindness, but it should just be seen. You should never, you should acknowledge a person's color and possibly the hardships they may have to incur, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I do get what you're saying. It should never be the reason for why you think a person is a certain way. Yeah. But I feel sometimes it can be a double edge, as I just said. You kind of wonder, okay, why is this person casting this person because they're a good actor, or are they trying to make a statement? And it's unfortunate, like we're kind of thinking like this sometimes, because a person should just be cast purely because.
But that's so interesting, man, because that's essentially you're saying, are we propagandizing race?
Exactly.
Are we politicizing race? Is that what we're trying to do here?
I feel sometimes that is the case, and I can never discern that because I'm not in the room where they're casting this person. I don't know. I don't know what.
And plus, you're not in that person's mind.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know what their intentions are. But I can only hope that it's coming from a place of this guy is getting the job because they are the best person to portray this character. I can only hope. But yeah, Tuna, I don't know how you feel about that, man.
Yeah, no. So I mean, particularly with the colorblindness thing, I agree with the way Mike put it, in a sense that you have to. We all acknowledge that there are prejudices. Everybody knows it. But when it comes to certain individual instances, someone's color doesn't matter. So when you're watching Spider-Man, Fox Spider-Man, obviously that's the only Spider-Man cartoon for me.
Hey man, that is the one, man. When Peter Parker was actually angry all the time in that.
Exactly. But when you're watching it, the race of the characters doesn't matter. Like, you are watching, you're paying attention to the story. You're paying attention to the characters, not their race. But of course, as you grow older and you understand the importance of labels, the importance of symbolism, you do understand that in actuality, to support and to provide, let's say, cultural role models, or more like cultural role models that don't belong to any one particular tribe, faction, or whatever, empowering mythologies that are equitable, you will need to address representation in some way, shape, or form. Star Trek, for example, has, in my opinion, always done a very good job of being progressive in representation on screen. Whether or not it's always resulted in the best storytelling or not is subjective to you. But if you look at the original series, one of the first TV series to, have a long-standing Black character, and not just first interracial on-screen kiss as well. And even conceptually, what Gene Roddenberry was trying to show was a future where individuals are treated equitably. It's almost a utopian environment where people are treated equitably. That's what he's trying to show on screen. And I guess there's a question there, which is, as children, we happily consume Spider-Man, Disney, whatever, and we don't really think about it. It's not a problem. But then at some stage, it becomes a problem. Maybe not for us, but for some people. Like Hamza said, when you see an advert with an interracial couple, it doesn't bother me. But it's a problem for some people, and that's a question. Why is that? Why is the representation of that an issue? It's not my issue. But it's...
I hear that, but I think what Hamza was saying, though, is when race, in a sense, is weaponized. So, you're using it in a way that seems overly calculated, as opposed
to elicit a response or to promote a particular agenda.
Exactly, because I find
Colgate just want to sell toothpaste.
No, this is true. I find, just as Mike said, that there's usually two cases to this. There's a side of me that's like, what are these guys' intentions? And then there's also, I've heard people say, there's videos of watching podcasts or whatever, where someone is upset because there's a rise in this kind of thing. And then I think to myself, but dude, this is just a representation of what's actually, there are interracial relationships out there. Like, this is just what is actually going on. Yeah. So why does this advert bother you so much? So it's a bit of a, there's both sides to this.
Yeah. I think the issue that some people may have with representation is not general representation. Because, like, if we look at the demographics of our societies now, and we look at London. London is a melting pot. You look at the UK. UK is essentially a melting pot. Since I
would say certain cities. There's still parts of Britain that aren't really that integrated.
Certain cities. And we know that obviously from the whole, 1948, when Windrush, landed at the sort of Tilbury docks, we know that was in a sense a beginning of where the UK, specifically places like Tilbury, places maybe even near Essex, places like London, certain places in London, Birmingham, they started to actually look more mixed. Now, here's the thing. That now is a norm. So when we see an interracial couple on screen, we shouldn't be shocked by it because it's something that we're used to. It's something that we should be accustomed to. I think what people tend to be maybe annoyed by is when, for example, there is a minority, that is depicted on screen. That could be anything. So that could be a cultural minority. That could be a minority from LGBTQ. That could be a minority in terms of the way people think, certain belief systems. When a minority is put on screen, some people may feel that there is a clear statement being made because this is not a general norm. This is something which is happening in pockets of society as opposed to society on a whole. And that's why when people see that that's shown on screen, sometimes they think,
yeah, what are you playing at?
Yeah,
is there an agenda here?
Yeah. All right, but here's the thing. Let's take a scenario where there's a TV show. It's a drama. It's just a down the middle drama, and the whole cast is Asian. It's set in the UK, and the whole entire cast is Asian. I wouldn't have a problem watching it.
Right? That's goodness gracious me that you just described.
Yeah, man. Or what's the other one again?
TV show.
What's that?
Citizen Khan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
That wasn't great, man. I'm sorry. Anyone that worked on that show, man, do better.
But I'm talking about not a comedy, because I think the ethnic minority comedy fits a box. Look at us. We're making jokes at ourselves. Put us on TV. A drama, like a serious drama, where the fact that they're Asian or of an ethnic background is not even discussed. It's just an all Asian cast. I would be interested to see what the view with quality. Like, I'm talking about a quality show. Like, I don't know. You take The Bodyguard. I don't know if you've seen The Bodyguard or whatever. You take that. You just switch all the cast out for Asian, Black, whatever. I would be interested to see what the viewership of that show is.
But Tunde, all you need to do is look at Fresh Prince.
There's a comedy though.
Okay.
But that's what I'm saying. Lovecraft Country, man. It's a set, more or less is a drama, but with fantastical elements to it. Even I'm trying to say.
But that's
I would say that's probably the closest thing I could think of, because it's not a comedy at all. No one's got a catchphrase or anything like this.
But that's on Netflix. When whatever. Because I think there's also Bridgerton as well, which a lot of people have talked about, which is like a weird type of culture mashup kind of thing. I've not watched it, but I understand it's like
I've heard a lot
about take on that thing. But the difference is with shows like Bridgerton and this other show, we're in an age where people can choose what they want to watch. So if you want to watch Bridgerton, go ahead. When you have adverts or when you have films, you know, there's slightly less choice in that. You can obviously choose to watch a film or not, but like particularly people responding negatively to representation in adverts. So seeing a mixed family on an advert for toothpaste or something like this, you know, they don't necessarily have the choice. They have to watch it. I guess where I was getting at is, you know, I wonder what the viewership rate would if you just switched that out. If you completely switched the cast out, the quality of the show would be exactly the same. You know, would these people
ratings and
would it affect ratings? Would it affect the complaints? Would it affect issues? Would people just not watch it? I would like to think that ultimately it wouldn't make a difference, because I would like to think that when people complain about representation, it's just a slight resistance to change. And actually, once you kind of move over to the other side, you realize.
I think, but then on the other hand, sorry to cut. Actually, Hamza, no, I'll let you go.
I think forgive me, I can't remember exactly the scenario. Wasn't there something recent? I think it was ITV. There was I think it was something to do with a member of cast that was black, or there was too much representation of black people or something like this. And there was Ofsted got a lot of reports and complaints. For the life of me, I can't remember.
I think I know what you're talking. I think it was an interpretation of the monarchy.
Something like this. I can't remember.
But with a black cast, if I'm not mistaken, or like Anne Boleyn was black, or something along those like lines. This. I can't remember. Anyway.
And there was, you know, this uproar about it. So always it's going to be changed. And even going back to Anne Boleyn, I think recently, a woman, a black woman was cast and stuff like this. Obviously, this is not a depiction of real life. She wasn't a white black person in real life. But again, this is the thing I was going back to. Was the best actress picked, or were they trying?
Well, that reminds me of the Harry Potter situation with the Harry Potter play, where they picked a black woman to play Hermione.
Yeah.
And, you know, people were in uproar about it. And it just reminded me of something that I was going to say about, particularly with fictional things, you know, which is, it's made up. It's fiction.
Exactly. I completely agree, because it's interchangeable. If it's a fiction, then that means...
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
That means it's a construct. If it's a construct, that means elements within the construct can change, can shift. But when it's historical,
Berlin.
That's why people get upset. It's when it's historical, and you're now trying to push this kind of counter narrative to what actually happened in history.
Yeah.
And I think, are people justified in why they might be upset, or is it just again, you know, I could watch this Anne Boleyn thing and go, whoa, this actress is actually amazing. You know what I'm trying to say? And it's her acting that really, you know, I really get into it. But most people just don't want to give it a chance, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. We can think about that and think to ourselves, you know, I'm happy on a personal level. I'm happy for that actress, you know what I mean? She's getting a job. She obviously, it means that she'll most likely now, because she has been seen, be getting other jobs and other opportunities within the industry. However, on the flip side, then there's certain people that decry cultural appropriation. So what would it be strange if a white individual then says, hold on, but this is cultural appropriation because this is not correct according to history. Anne Boleyn was not a black woman. A fact.
Yeah. I'm also curious to know what would happen if, I don't know, they recast the Black Panther and they got Chris Pine to play. I don't know.
Exactly. Or Rowan Atkinson.
Yeah.
Yeah, with that stupid oh, jeez.
So,
man, that would be actually kind of funny.
Because I know we've been going on for a bit. I guess because I think we could come back on the cultural appropriation piece. But in terms of representation, any? Oh no, I don't want to say final because we could always come back to it. But like closing comments
on representation as well. Like just going back to what I was saying. For me personally, growing up, if there was a character I could relate to, no matter the sex, no matter the race, as long as there was elements to this character I could relate to, whether it be a point of view or a moral standpoint or whatever it is, if I could see myself or some of the choices they make, if I could go, hey, I would do that too. For me, that's all it took for me to be fully invested in their journey. But then again, as I grew up, I do understand people's arguments for, if they look like me, I get it. But Mike also made that point. If it's just because of the food they eat, that's just superficial. That's not really enough. I mean, there could be a villain in a movie that likes the same snacks I like. But if he's a person I detest, I guess I don't really relate to him. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah. So that's a bit of a, that's not enough. So I feel like, and again, with guys that are cast for just the color, again, I can't tell what the intentions were for this person. But sometimes you can feel whether or not if it's sincere. You know what I'm trying to say. I just think this is something, Hollywood going forward, I think they have to be very careful about. Because not everyone out there is like, oh, just because you cast a black actor, I'm going to support it. Not everyone feels, just as Mike said, not all black people think the same. So I think they have to be very careful how they tread. Because, hey, man, we all know how fickle people can be. On one hand, you're casting all these black people. Yeah. And the next, you mess up. You cast one too many black people. And it's like, hey, hang about. You're trying to do something here. What are you trying to do? So, hey, they just have to be careful. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And yeah. I think for me, it's just, I suppose I'd echo Chimamanda NGOZI Adichie, where she says, that we need to just proliferate more stories, more examples of how people are, more examples of, black people in a variety of roles to ensure that stereotypes don't persist and stereotypes don't exist. But at the same time, I know I don't want to start another conversation, but at the same time, just as a side note, oftentimes stereotypes become stereotypes because there is a grain of truth in them. Doesn't mean that it's true for all of those, all people of that culture or of that shade, but it does mean that there has been a case or cases where that has happened or that has occurred. It's the same thing with a cliche. Linguistically speaking, a cliche becomes a cliche because it's become self-evident to be true, like or something that people use in everyday parlance or everyday speech. So if I say, but at the end of the day, the reason at the end of the day has persisted for so long as a phrase is because it works. At the end of the day, you're tired. You wanna sort of, it sums up something. It's a summation of an idea. It's the conclusion of something. So in the same way cliches exist, and cliches in I would argue, as someone who's a writer as well, in some ways you need cliche to actually be able to hold a novel together. Not every phrase that you say is gonna be completely new, a new way of using words. Okay, cliches in the sense are kind of like the glue that keeps a novel together. So in the same way we need cliches, stereotypes also help us, and I think it also helps us on a day-to-day level. If it's midnight and you happen to be walking down an alleyway, and right at the end you can see hooded figures in a huddle, something will tell you on a biological level, maybe I should turn back.
Yeah.
It's a stereotype. But that stereotype might save your life.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah. For me, I don't disagree with any of that. I guess the only thing I would say is, it doesn't matter, but at the same time, it does. At the same time, the representation in the stories that we tell ourselves goes a long way in creating the the myths, for a better phrase, that we believe. So I think some representation in that does go a long way in raising people up and giving people heroic or high valued moral examples to follow. So yeah, to that extent, I do feel it's quite important. But there's a lot there, and there are many potholes that can open up, that can be exploited, and maybe have been exploited. So what you got to say on that?
Cool. Obviously, just to say to everyone listening, obviously, if you want to comment on it, please feel free to comment. Give us your opinion on what you think. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you have a few things to say to us to educate us. So that's cool. Also cool. But yeah, really appreciate if you could respond in that way, and please obviously like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
All right, take it easy.